3:47 a.m., a Russian forward operating base sat silent under the cold Ukrainian sky. 12 hectares of Soviet engineering, fuel reserves stacked in neat rows, ammunition depots built to withstand decades, $40 million of military infrastructure, operational, fortified, protected by layers of perimeter security and the assumption that wars are still won by tonnage. 14 kilometers away, a commercial quadcopter lifted off from a muddy field. Cost, $487. Payload, improvised munitions you could buy components for at any hardware store. No pilot in a fighter jet. No artillery crew. Just 3 Ukrainian operators, 2 laptops, and an algorithm that had been teaching itself to read thermal signatures for 6 weeks. This wasn't luck. This was mathematics with a fuse attached. The operators had spent 11 days mapping the base using open-source satellite imagery. Free tools anyone with internet access can download. They cross-referenced supply truck patterns, analyzed guard rotation schedules scraped from intercepted radio chatter, and used thermal imaging software to identify heat signatures that didn't match living bodies. They found it, a 6 by 8 meter structure radiating consistent low-level heat. Ammunition depot, confirmed by 3 separate data points. Precision isn't about firepower anymore. It's about information density. At 3:52, the drone locked thermal acquisition. The algorithm calculated wind speed, adjusted for target drift, and executed an approach vector that avoided known radar coverage. No human hand guided the final 30 seconds. The software did what software does best. It optimized for a single outcome and removed every variable that didn't serve it. At 3 hours, 54 minutes, and 16 seconds, impact. What happened next wasn't an explosion. It was a sequence. Cascade. The initial detonation breached the ammunition depot, which triggered sympathetic detonation in adjacent storage. Fuel reserves caught. Command vehicles parked 40 meters away erupted as shockwaves propagated through underground supply tunnels no satellite had ever photographed. 47 seconds from first impact to structural collapse. The base went from full operational capacity to statistical zero not because of overwhelming force, but because someone found the right 6 square meters and applied pressure exactly where physics would do the rest. The cost asymmetry is obscene. $500 in consumer electronics just erased $40 million in military investment. But here's what makes this a paradigm shift, not just a tactical win. The barrier to entry just evaporated. You don't need a defense contractor. You don't need a military academy degree. You need pattern recognition, open source tools, and the patience to let an algorithm learn what a target looks like when it's trying to hide. When teenagers with coding skills can outmaneuver generals with metal collections, when precision becomes something you can download instead of something you build over decades, the entire calculus of conflict rewrites itself. Traditional armies are designed for mass. More tanks, more soldiers, more firepower. But mass is a liability now. It's a heat signature. It's a logistical pattern. It's a target that screams its location to anyone with the patience to listen. This isn't about drones winning wars. It's about whether the institutions built for industrial-scale conflict can survive in an era where a college dropout with satellite access and 3 nights of patience can delete a battalion's supply chain before breakfast. Code beats mass. Information beats armor. And the side that accepts this first doesn't just win battles, they redefine what a battle even looks like. Type A if you think this changes everything. Type B if you think defense will adapt. But here's the part no one's talking about yet. That same algorithm? It's learning. Every strike feeds it new data. Every failed intercept teaches it what doesn't work. And somewhere right now, it's running simulations on targets that don't know they've already been mapped. The guards changed shift at 3:58 a.m. Same rotation they'd run for 43 nights straight. Predictable, comfortable, fatal. 200 Russian personnel slept in barracks designed to house a battalion. Fuel trucks sat in neat formations. Command tents glowed with the dull light of radio equipment that hadn't been upgraded since 2007. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. That was the problem. 14 kilometers out, Ukrainian operators weren't sleeping. They'd been watching for 72 hours straight. Not with binoculars, but with reconnaissance drones so small they registered as birds on motion sensors. 3 days of obsessive documentation. Guard rotation schedules logged to the minute. Anti-air battery positions mapped with centimeter precision. High-value targets marked, cross-referenced, prioritized. They weren't preparing an attack. They were building a simulation of one, testing every vector until the algorithm told them which approach had a 94% success probability. At 4 a.m., the first wave launched. Decoy drones, cheap, loud, obvious, screamed in from the northwest. Exactly what radar operators are trained to track. Anti-air batteries swiveled, locked acquisition, opened fire. Soldiers stumbled from barracks, scanning the sky where the noise was coming from. Textbook response. Perfect discipline, which meant no one was looking southeast. The real payload came in at treetop level, 3 drones running dark, navigation handled by pre-programmed GPS coordinates and terrain-following algorithms that adjust flight paths faster than human reflexes can process. Radar systems designed to catch high-altitude bombers don't see threats that fly like they're afraid of branches. By the time acoustic sensors registered the motor hum, impact was 6 seconds out. First target, ammunition depot. Not the largest structure, but the one that would do the work for them. Shaped charge, precisely placed, breaching containment at the exact angle to maximize secondary detonation. The explosion didn't just destroy munitions, it announced itself to every other volatile thing within blast radius. Second target, command center, hit while personnel were still processing the first shockwave. Communication infrastructure vaporized before a single distress call could transmit coordinates, before anyone could warn adjacent units that this wasn't random, it was surgical. Third target, vehicle depot. Fuel tanks ruptured, transport trucks rendered immobile, supply chains severed in the time it takes to tie your boots. 3 critical nodes. For minutes, the entire operational capacity of a 200-person encampment reduced to chaos and smoke before sirens even began their wail. This wasn't overwhelming force. This was overwhelming knowledge. The defenders had more soldiers, more guns, more armor sitting in formations that looked impressive from satellite imagery. But the attackers had something more valuable. They knew exactly where those soldiers would be standing when the clock hit 4 a.m. They knew which structures mattered and which were just concrete. They knew the difference between destroying everything and destroying the right things. Sun Tzu wrote it 2,500 years ago. Attack where they are unprepared, appear where you are not expected. But he was working with horses and spies who took weeks to gather intelligence. These operators had sensor fusion, pattern recognition software, and the patience to watch until the enemy's routine became their vulnerability. David versus Goliath gets retold every generation, but the weapon changes. It used to be a sling. Then it was guerrilla tactics. Then improvised explosives. Now it's information architecture, the ability to see more, process faster, and strike at the exact moment when superior numbers become a liability instead of an advantage. Because here's the truth that keeps generals awake at night. You can have 1,000 soldiers, state-of-the-art equipment, fortified positions, and it means nothing if someone knows exactly where you are, exactly when you're vulnerable, and exactly which 6 square meters to hit to make the other 994 irrelevant. Which would you rather command? A battalion with perfect discipline, or a 3-person team with perfect information? The doctrine is shifting underneath us. Firepower used to determine outcomes. Now foresight does. And the side that refuses to accept this doesn't just lose battles. They lose before the battle even starts, because someone else already ran the simulation and found the answer. Somewhere tonight, another encampment is running the same guard rotation it ran last week. Same patterns. Same assumptions about what threats look like. And somewhere else, an algorithm is watching. Learning their schedule. Calculating probabilities. Waiting for 4 a.m. 8 minutes. That's all it took to prove that every military budget spreadsheet from the last 50 years might be solving the wrong equation. Minute 0. A Ukrainian operator opens commercial satellite imagery, the kind you can access from a coffee shop in Prague or a basement in Brooklyn. Target locks. Russian staging area, 11 kilometers behind front lines. Supply trucks in formation. Ammunition stockpiles under camouflage netting that looks opaque to human eyes but radiates a thermal signature like a neon sign to the right sensor. Minute 2. Flight path calculation. The software isn't guessing, it's solving for probability. Known radar coverage mapped from intercepted technical manuals. Terrain elevation data scraped from open-source geological surveys. Wind patterns pulled from weather stations 70 kilometers away. The algorithm plots 17 possible routes, stress tests each one against detection risk, and selects the vector with a 91% survival probability. No human intuition required. Just math that doesn't care about courage or doctrine. Minute 4. The drone crosses into contested airspace, autopilot engaged, flying below 50 meters, low enough that radar systems designed to catch fighter jets see nothing but ground clutter. It navigates by GPS coordinates locked 3 days ago, adjusting for crosswinds in real time. No radio communication, no thermal exhaust, just a 4-kilogram object moving at 47 kilometers per hour with the mission parameters hard-coded into firmware that won't forget them under fire. Minute 6. Visual confirmation. The operator takes manual control for the final approach. Rows of supply trucks arranged in parade ground precision. Ammunition stockpiles staged for rapid distribution. Temporary barracks housing personnel who thought 11 kilometers was enough distance. Everything is exactly where 3 days of reconnaissance said it would be, because logistics moves slowly and patterns are predictable when you're managing hundreds of tons of supplies. Minute 7. Final approach. The operator doesn't rush. Speed creates vibration. Vibration creates acoustic signatures. Instead, the drone descends in controlled increments, adjusting pitch to minimize motor noise, choosing an approach angle that keeps the target structure between the drone and the nearest sentry position. Precision isn't about hitting the target. It's about hitting it before anyone knows you're there. Minute 8. Impact. The explosion registers on seismic monitors 40 kilometers away. Not because the payload was massive, it wasn't, but because it breached an ammunition stockpile at the exact angle to turn containment into accelerant. Secondary detonations cascade through supply trucks carrying artillery shells staged for tomorrow's offensive that will never happen. Fuel reserves ignite. Temporary barracks collapse under shockwaves that propagate faster than the human nervous system can process danger. 8 minutes. Target acquired to mission complete. Now let's talk about the ratio, because this is where military doctrine meets venture capital logic and discovers they've been speaking different languages. Ukraine's cost. Approximately $3,000. That's the drone, the payload, the operator training hours amortized across 40 similar missions, the electricity to run the laptop, the satellite imagery subscription. Round it up to 4,000 if you want to include administrative overhead. Call it 5,000 to be generous. Russia's loss. 14 vehicles, $2 to $4 million in ammunition and equipment, the logistical capacity to sustain offensive operations for 72 hours, and something less quantifiable but more valuable, the strategic confidence to park high-value assets within 20 kilometers of the front. Because now every staging area is a potential target. Every supply depot requires dispersion. Every concentration of force becomes a concentration of vulnerability. The return on investment is 1,000 to 1. That's not a military metric. That's a disruption metric. This is minimum viable product thinking applied to kinetic operations. Rapid iteration. Scalable impact. You don't need a $10 billion fighter jet program that takes 15 years to field. You need $3,000 solutions you can deploy in 3 days and improve every week based on what the last mission taught you. Traditional doctrine says you win through mass. More tanks, more artillery, more boots on the ground. Air superiority. Numerical advantage. Industrial capacity to replace losses faster than the enemy can inflict them. This strike says you win through computation. Better intelligence, faster adaptation. Operators who think like engineers testing hypotheses instead of soldiers following playbooks written before satellites existed. The future of conflict isn't about who has the biggest army. It's about who can calculate victory faster than the opponent can calculate defense. It's about whether your decision cycle, observe, orient, decide, act, runs in minutes or days. Because the side that completes that loop faster doesn't just win engagements. They define what an engagement even looks like before the other side realizes the rules changed. Somewhere right now, a defense contractor is presenting a slide deck for a weapon system that will cost $4 billion and enter service in 2031. And somewhere else, a 23-year-old with satellite access and coding skills just identified a target that will be obsolete in 8 minutes. Guess which timeline the next war runs on. They said it couldn't be done. Not shouldn't, couldn't. Russian air defense networks made the word impenetrable sound like understatement. S-300 batteries scanning 360 degrees. Panzer systems designed specifically to swat drones from the sky like flies with delusions of grandeur. Electronic warfare arrays that could fry guidance systems before a threat crossed the outer perimeter. 15 kilometers of layered defense architecture that cost more than some countries' entire military budgets. Conventional wisdom said deep strikes were suicide missions. Pilots knew it. Planners knew it. The Russians knew it, which meant they slept comfortably 15 kilometers behind lines, confident that physics and technology had built them a fortress nothing could penetrate. Then a $2,000 commercial drone with aftermarket modifications made liars out of everyone who said impossible. The target was high value, a Russian battalion staging area preparing for offensive operations. Command posts, artillery pieces staged for tomorrow's bombardment. Fuel trucks lined up to support a push that would cost Ukrainian positions dearly. Intelligence confirmed it. Satellite imagery verified it. And every conventional approach to neutralize it ended the same way, in a fireball 3 seconds after crossing the defense perimeter. So Ukrainian special operations stopped trying to fight the system and started gaming it instead. Launch time: 0347 hours. Not random. Shift change. The 60-second window when one radar crew is logging off and another is logging on. When human attention dips because exhaustion meets routine and the brain assumes nothing will happen in the next minute because nothing happened in the last 4 hours. Altitude: 58 meters. Agricultural height: where radar systems expect tractors, crop dusters, civilian vehicles that aren't worth the missile it would cost to investigate. Fly low enough and you're not a threat. You're noise in the data, something the filtering algorithms discard automatically because false positives waste operator attention. Flight path: terrain masking. Valleys that break line of sight. Tree lines that absorb radar returns. Urban clutter where a 4-kilogram object blends into the electromagnetic chaos of cell towers and power lines. The drone didn't fly through the defense network. It threaded between the places where sensors could see and the places where terrain created shadows. Approach vector: from the direction of Russian-held territory. Because defensive posture isn't symmetrical. Systems face outward toward the threat they expect. Sentries watch the horizon where enemies should appear. No one expects an attack from behind their own lines, from the direction where relief convoys arrive and friendly patrols return. Psychology isn't a weapon system, but it might as well be. The drone crossed into the battalion perimeter at 0353. No alarms. No intercept. It flew between guard posts at an altitude that made it sound like wind through trees, if you noticed it at all. 6 minutes of flight time through what was supposed to be impenetrable defense, and the only thing that detected it was a motion sensor that flagged it as probable wildlife. At 0359, the payload detonated inside the command post perimeter. The response wasn't immediate. It should have been trained personnel, established protocols, clear chains of command. But the first crucial seconds were lost to disbelief. Because sensors registering an explosion inside the defensive perimeter didn't compute. It violated the model of reality that said this space was safe. Operators spent 3 seconds checking if the sensor was malfunctioning. Another 4 confirming what their training said was impossible. By the time they confirmed the attack was real, secondary explosions were already cascading through ammunition stockpiles stored 200 meters from the impact site. The fuel trucks ignited. The artillery pieces, staged and ready for tomorrow's offensive, were now shrapnel and twisted metal that would never fire around. 15 kilometers behind the impenetrable defense network. $2,000 in commercial hardware. 7 minutes from launch to mission complete. The tactical lesson is obvious. Air defense has blind spots. But the philosophical lesson cuts deeper. Every impossible challenge is just a puzzle no one's solved yet. Every fortress has a side door, not because architects are incompetent, but because perfect defense against every vector would cost infinity and take forever. Every red line is drawn by people who assume you'll approach from the direction they're watching. But what if you don't? What if you launch during shift change when attention lapses? What if you fly where sensors expect tractors instead of threats? What if you approach from the direction where defenses are relaxed because nobody would be crazy enough to try that? Audacity isn't recklessness. It's pattern recognition. It's seeing that every system optimized for one type of threat creates vulnerabilities to threats that don't fit the profile. It's understanding that impossible often just means nobody's been creative enough yet. Russian commanders said deep strikes couldn't happen. They had the data. They had the defense budget. They had decades of military doctrine that said air superiority and layered defense make certain things physically impossible. And then someone who didn't care what doctrine said flew a consumer-grade quadcopter through the gaps between what was and what everyone assumed had to be. Every red line is an invitation. Every can't be done is a challenge waiting for someone bold enough or crazy enough to test whether the people who drew that line actually checked every approach vector or just the ones they expected. What impossible thing are you not attempting because everyone says it can't be done? What if they're wrong? 47 seconds. From the moment sensors detected something wrong to the moment nothing was left to defend. That's not a battle. That's not even a skirmish. That's the execution of a death sentence written in code and delivered at 40 kilometers per hour. No warning shots. No escalation. No chance. The Ukrainian operators didn't launch an attack. They conducted a symphony where every instrument knew its part and the finale was inevitable. Drone Alpha lifted off first. High-altitude reconnaissance, loitering at 800 meters where it could see everything and threaten nothing. Its job wasn't to fight. It was to watch. Thermal imaging fed real-time data back to operators who weren't guessing where targets were. They were watching them breathe. Ammunition storage bunker. Confirmed. Fuel depot mapped. Guard positions. Logged with timestamps. Everything the other drones needed to know, transmitted in encrypted bursts that looked like background radiation to electronic warfare systems designed to catch military-grade communications. Drone Bravo launched second. Electronic warfare payload. No explosives, just a transmitter pumped to maximum wattage, broadcasting interference across the frequency bands Russian units use for tactical comms. Not sophisticated jamming brute force. White noise loud enough to drown out the words "we're under attack" for the crucial 60 seconds when those words would have mattered. It didn't need to last long. Just long enough. Drone Charlie launched last. The Hammer. 5 kilograms of explosives locked onto GPS coordinates Alpha had confirmed 12 seconds earlier. No pilot adjusting course. No real-time decisions. Just navigation firmware executing a flight plan with the emotional investment of a calculator solving for X. Timeline 0. Launch sequence initiated. 3 drones, 3 mission profiles, 1 synchronized outcome. Second 31. Charlie crosses the perimeter. Guards hear the motor hum, maybe 0400 hours. Shift change happened 20 minutes ago. Fatigue makes sounds blend together. Wind through trees, distant generator noise, a drone flying autopilot at 53 meters. By the time someone thinks that sounds wrong, Charlie is already inside the defensive envelope where anti-air systems can't depress barrels low enough to acquire lock without risking friendly fire. Second 43. Final approach corridor confirmed clear by Alpha's thermal feed. No personnel in blast radius. Charlie descends to terminal approach altitude, 12 meters above target. Velocity dropping to 22 kilometers per hour for precision impact. The guidance system doesn't care about survival. It cares about hitting a 6-meter-wide structure from an angle that maximizes penetration depth. Second 47. Impact. Center mass on target. The explosion isn't massive. 5 kilograms doesn't vaporize bunkers. But it doesn't need to. The munitions stored inside do the heavy lifting. Shaped charge breaches containment, and suddenly everything that was safely inert becomes aggressively reactive. Artillery shells detonate in sequence. Ammunition crates ignite. The bunker doesn't explode, it ruptures, spraying fragmentation and overpressure in every direction physics allows. The chain reaction propagates faster than orders can be shouted. Fuel storage 200 meters away ignites from shrapnel impacts. The vehicle depot, trucks staged for tomorrow's supply run, becomes a junkyard of twisted metal and burning diesel. Shockwaves shatter windows in occupied barracks. Personnel stumble outside, disoriented, trying to understand what just happened and why the comms network is screaming static instead of commands. 3 drones. Total mission cost under $10,000, and that's including operator training hours, satellite data subscriptions, and the laptop running mission control software. Asset cluster destroyed, north of $5 million. 14 vehicles. An ammunition stockpile that took 6 weeks to accumulate. A logistics node that Russian planners spent months positioning to support offensive operations that will now never launch because the supplies don't exist anymore. The math is obscene. The implications are worse. This is the new arithmetic of warfare, where teenagers with reflexes trained on video games and 3 months of operator school can neutralize brigade-level logistics nodes that took career officers years to establish. Where precision doesn't require billion-dollar guidance systems, it requires patience, open-source intelligence, and the willingness to let algorithms handle the parts humans mess up under pressure. You don't need overwhelming force anymore. Overwhelming force is expensive, slow to deploy, visible from satellite imagery, vulnerable to everything from mud to supply chain disruptions. Force is a liability dressed up as strength. Precision is the weapon. Information is the ammunition. And the side that accepts this first doesn't just win engagements, they redefine what winning looks like. Because here's what 47 seconds proved. Doctrine is shattering in real time. The assumptions that governed conflict for 70 years, that defense requires depth, that high-value assets are safe behind layered security, that technological advantage belongs to whoever spends the most. None of it holds when 3 drones working in coordination can delete a battalion's operational capacity before anyone finishes their coffee. The thunder wasn't just the explosion echoing across the valley. It was the sound of every general who ever said, "This is how wars are won," realizing the rulebook just became obsolete. Somewhere tonight, another ammunition depot sits behind another defensive perimeter, protected by doctrine and the assumption that 47 seconds isn't enough time to change everything. And somewhere else, 3 drones are being programmed with coordinates. Tick, tick, tick. There's a revolution happening, and if you're listening for explosions, you'll miss it entirely. A Ukrainian drone strike on a Russian military encampment made headlines because of the fireball. But the fireball is the least interesting part. Explosions are ancient technology. Humans have been making things combust since we discovered fire could be weaponized. What's revolutionary isn't the detonation. It's everything that happened in the 72 hours before anyone pressed launch. Days of pattern analysis. Not soldiers studying maps with grease pencils, machine learning algorithms processing satellite imagery, frame by frame, identifying changes in vehicle density that human eyes would dismiss as noise. A supply truck appears Tuesday. 3 more appear Thursday. By Saturday, the algorithm flags a probability spike. Staging area, confidence level 87%. Social media geolocation. Soldiers post photos. Metadata embeds coordinates. Open source researchers cross-reference timestamps with known unit movements. A selfie taken at 1,430 hours confirms what satellite imagery suggested. Personnel concentration increasing, defensive posture relaxed. Target validation doesn't require spies anymore. It requires patience and the understanding that humans document their own patterns. Weather modeling, wind speed, temperature gradients, precipitation forecasts, not for comfort, but for flight path optimization. The algorithm calculates 17 possible approach vectors, stress tests each against atmospheric conditions, and selects the route with maximum probability of undetected transit. Physics becomes an ally when you understand it better than the opponent does. Communications intercepts, not espionage signal analysis. Radio chatter increases at 0, 600 and 1800 hours. Personnel concentration peaks during evening meal service. The strike window isn't chosen randomly. It's calculated for maximum impact and minimum escape time, determined by the enemy's own behavioral patterns. This operation wasn't won by bravery, though courage was required. Someone still had to fly the mission knowing anti-air systems could vaporize the drone in seconds. But courage without intelligence is just sacrifice. Intelligence without courage is just theory. This was won by information architecture. Human analysts identifying questions worth asking. Open source researchers aggregating data from sources that didn't know they were contributing intelligence. Signal processing software filtering noise from meaning. Predictive modeling synthesizing disparate inputs into a coherent operational picture. The drone was just the delivery mechanism for a conclusion reached by distributed intelligence working in concert. A conclusion that said, this target, this moment, this approach vector. The strike itself was almost anticlimactic. By the time the drone launched, the outcome was statistically determined. The explosion was just reality catching up to what the data had already proven. What we're witnessing isn't just a new tactic. It's warfare transitioning from industrial age mass violence to information age strategic calculation. The industrial model said victory goes to whoever manufactures more tanks, trains more soldiers, sustains more casualties while maintaining offensive pressure. Mass production, attrition, endurance. The information model says victory goes to whoever sees more clearly, decides more rapidly, and adapts more fluidly. The side that understands the battlefield as a data environment doesn't just win engagements, it obsoletes the opponent's entire operational framework. Because once you're operating on better information, every move the opponent makes is predictable. Every concentration of force becomes a target. Every pattern becomes a vulnerability. And here's the part that matters beyond tactics and strategy. Precision reduces suffering. That sounds paradoxical. War is violence. How can more effective violence reduce suffering? But consider the alternative. Industrial age warfare means artillery barrages that level city blocks to destroy a single target. Carpet bombing that kills thousands to eliminate hundreds. Sieges that starve civilians because cutting supply lines requires surrounding entire populations. Information age warfare, when executed with precision, means a 5-kilogram payload eliminating a military target without collateral damage to surrounding structures. It means strikes timed for minimum personnel concentration. It means logistics nodes destroyed before supplies reach frontline units, which means fewer battles fought, which means fewer casualties on both sides. This isn't about celebrating destruction. It's about recognizing that strategic clarity shortens wars. That intelligence applied ruthlessly can accomplish in days what brute force would require months to achieve. Months of sustained violence, displacement, destruction that compounds until peace is just exhaustion wearing a treaty signature. The drone operators who executed this strike weren't solving for maximum casualties. They were solving for operational paralysis, how to make an enemy unit combat ineffective without killing everyone inside it. The explosion was catastrophic to equipment and infrastructure. But personnel casualties were limited because the strike was timed for shift change, when concentration was predictable and avoidable. That's not mercy. That's mathematics. But mathematics that values efficiency over body count is progress, even when wrapped in the language of warfare. The question this raises, the question our generation has to answer, is whether we can apply this same intelligence-first thinking to solving conflicts before they require drones. Because everything that made this strike possible exists outside military contexts. Pattern recognition, data synthesis, predictive modeling, open source intelligence. These aren't weapons. They're methods. And methods can be pointed at problems that don't involve explosions. What if we analyzed social tensions with the same obsessive precision we analyze enemy positions? What if we predicted economic instability with the same algorithms we use to predict supply chain vulnerabilities? What if diplomatic solutions were optimized with the same computational rigor we apply to flight paths? We have the tools. We have the intelligence architecture. We've proven we can see patterns, process information, and reach conclusions with unprecedented accuracy. The revolution isn't that drones can strike targets. It's that intelligence, distributed, collaborative, relentlessly analytical intelligence, can solve problems humans previously thought required violence to address. The drone operators proved it works in warfare. Now we get to decide what other problems we pointed at. The algorithm isn't the weapon. It's the possibility that we might be smart enough to need fewer weapons. That's the revolution. Quiet, calculating, already happening. And if we're paying attention, if we're thinking clearly, maybe the next breakthrough isn't a better drone. Maybe it's not needing one. Let's reverse engineer victory. Not the propaganda version where courage and determination triumph against odds. The engineering version. The one that shows exactly how a $400 hobbyist drone achieved what Cold War military doctrine said required air wings, artillery battalions, and overwhelming numerical superiority. The Russian camp. Hardened structures built to Soviet engineering standards. Air defense coverage, Panzer systems, mobile radar arrays. Electronic warfare capability designed to fry guidance systems. Personnel numbering in the hundreds. Equipment staged for offensive operations. Infrastructure developed over months. Estimated value $40 million, and that's being conservative. The Ukrainian asset. Commercial quadcopter platform. $380. Consumer grade, available on Amazon, the kind hobbyists use for aerial photography. Aftermarket GPS module, $45. Accuracy within 3 meters, good enough for precision agriculture, better than good enough for what comes next. DIY payload release mechanism, machined from hardware store components for approximately $50. Total operator training time, 3 weeks. Let's be clear about the asymmetry. One side has decades of military investment. The other has a drone you could buy with a credit card and components you could assemble in a garage. So how does David not just fight Goliath, but vaporize him before Goliath knows the fight started? The competitive advantage wasn't hardware. It was information asymmetry. The attackers knew 3 things the defenders didn't. Not speculation. Not assumptions. Verified, actionable intelligence derived from systematic observation and analysis. First, precise timing of guard shift changes. Not approximate, precise. Derived from weeks of surveillance, correlating visual observation with communications intercepts with pattern analysis that identified the 60-second window when human attention lapses. When one crew logs off and another logs on. When fatigue meets routine and the brain assumes nothing will happen in the next minute because nothing happened in the last 4 hours. That window exists in every security rotation ever conducted. Most people never calculate when it occurs. These operators did. Second, blind spots in radar coverage created by terrain features. Radar propagates in straight lines. Terrain doesn't. Elevation mapping, free data from geological surveys, revealed valleys where line of sight breaks, tree lines where radar returns scatter, urban structures where electromagnetic clutter makes small objects invisible. The defense network was sophisticated. But sophisticated systems optimized for one type of threat create vulnerabilities to threats that don't match the profile. The drone didn't penetrate the coverage. It flew through the gaps where coverage couldn't physically exist. Third, location of ammunition storage within the camp. Not estimated. Confirmed. Via thermal signature analysis of satellite imagery. Ammunition storage radiates heat differently than barracks, differently than vehicle depots, differently than administrative buildings. The thermal profile is distinct if you know what you're measuring. Open-source satellite passes provided the raw data. Image processing software, also open-source, identified the signature. Cross-reference with supply truck traffic patterns confirmed it. The target was marked days before the drone ever launched. 3 information advantages. Sequentially exploited. The attack vector was surgical because it had to be. Timing determined the launch window 0347 hours during shift change when human sensors were least reliable. Terrain masking enabled approach. Flight path threaded through radar blind spots identified by elevation mapping, keeping the drone invisible until it was too late for intercept. Precise target knowledge enabled single-pass success. No circling, no searching, no second chances. 1 shot, 1 kill. Not because of explosive power, but because the drone knew exactly where to place that power for maximum effect. The payload was 5 kilograms. That doesn't level buildings. But it breaches ammunition storage, and then the stored munitions do the work. The explosion that destroyed a $40 million base wasn't generated by a $400 drone. It was generated by the defender's own supplies, ignited at the precise location where containment would fail catastrophically. The engineering lesson here is profound, and it applies far beyond warfare. Constraints breed innovation. When you can't match resources, you optimize information. When you can't dominate the battlefield, you dominate the decision cycle. Ukraine couldn't outspend Russia. The GDP differential made that impossible. So they outthought them. They turned military competition into an information processing problem, and information processing scales differently than industrial production. Building a tank requires factories, rare materials, trained workers, months of manufacturing. Processing satellite imagery requires laptops, open-source software, and operators who understand pattern recognition. One scales linearly with investment. The other scales exponentially with insight. This is the ODA loop weaponized. Observe, orient, decide, act. Fighter pilot John Boyd theorized it in the 1950s. Whoever completes that cycle faster controls the engagement. But he was thinking in terms of seconds, pilot reflexes, aircraft maneuverability. This operation ran the ODA loop over days. Observe, satellite imagery, communications intercepts, behavioral patterns. Orient, process the data, identify vulnerabilities, calculate probabilities. Decide, target selection, timing, approach vector. Act, drone launch, precision strike, mission complete. The defenders were still on observe when act was already finished. Their ODA loop was measured in hours, time to escalate reports, convene briefings, authorize responses. The attackers completed theirs in the time it took to press launch. Velocity isn't about speed. It's about compression. How much decision-making you can collapse into how small a time frame. How many variables you can process before the opponent finishes processing one. And here's what keeps engineers awake at night. This approach generalizes. The principles that let a $400 drone neutralize a $40 million base apply to any asymmetric problem. When you can't match your competitors' R&D budget, you out-iterate them with faster development cycles. When you can't match their manufacturing capacity, you optimize for precision instead of volume. When you can't match their market presence, you dominate information, you understand the customer better, you predict market shifts faster, you adapt while they're still planning. Resources matter, but information architecture matters more. Because resources are finite and expensive and slow to deploy. Information compounds. Every data point makes the next one more valuable. Every pattern recognized makes the next pattern easier to spot. Every cycle through the ODA loop makes the next cycle faster. The impossible problem you're trying to solve with brute force. More budget, more personnel, more time. What happens if you reframe it as an information problem instead? What would you need to know to make the solution obvious? Where would you find that information? How would you process it into actionable insight? The drone operators didn't win because they had better weapons. They won because they had better questions. And they didn't stop asking until the answers formed a flight path.